I'm Therese Fitzgerald, married Theresa Atwood Fitzgerald. I was born in February of 1935 in Columbus, Ohio. Grew up in various towns in Ohio, Zanesville, Lancaster, and then we moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin when I was in 7th grade. Went to school in Milwaukee and then moved back to Columbus and went to St. Mary of the Springs for college. I had twin sisters and a brother who was 9 years younger than I was. Twin sisters were less than 2 years. My mom was Helen Frances Reinhard. My dad was Walter Robert Atwood. My dad worked with his father when they were first married, and they lost his grocery store in the Depression in the 30s. And my mom was a housewife until she was 50 years old, when she went back to school and became a practical nurse and worked in local hospitals in Columbus. Before that time, they owned a fishing lodge in Canada where they had cabins for vacationers on the lake, and my dad was the guide. He took people out fishing, and Mom took care of the meals and the housework and that sort of thing. And then they moved back to Columbus, and he went back to work for the bread company. We grew up, a great part of our very young life was in Columbus, Ohio. And my dad got 2-week vacation every summer. We would pack up the car on Friday night and wait for him to come home from work, jump in the car and drive all night to Michigan or Wisconsin or Minnesota to go fishing. We would rent small cabins along various lakes and fish for 2 solid weeks, at which point we would put the fish on ice cut out of the lakes that the cabin owners kept for the whole summer, and take them back home and put them in the freezer. And this was just something that was always done. When we got to be around 8, 9, 10 years old, there were 4 kids in the car and 2 adults, and usually a dog or 2. And we became the 3 Daffodils and their brother Ronnie, who would sing a great deal of the trip at the top of our voices. We had carried that signature, I guess you'd call it, until my sisters passed away. We were the 3 Daffodils and our brother Ronnie. When we began to grow out of the time when we could afford to go, all of us go at the same time, to the fishing lodges, those who went to the lodge would write a handwritten, printed newsletter back home to the people who stayed at home, telling them the great news about how large the fish were and what kind they were and who was cleaning them. It was a great fun thing to tease about. There was sort of a tradition in my mother's family, especially among the women. They were always, from the time I was really little, talked about how they had wanted to go west. They were always going to be cowgirls, and they were going to go west any time, any minute now, and not one of them did it. I spent a great many hours reading all the Zane Grey books that were ever written. My mom had them on the shelf in the house, and I just start reading them when I was about 10. And then I felt like I basically owed all the women in my family to go west. Somebody had to do it. They had to break it out. That were 3 generations of women who had been going to go west, and I said I was going to do it, and I did. When I graduated from nursing school at St. Mary's, I went to work at the local children's hospital. Worked there a year, went back to get a master's at the University of Cincinnati. I didn't particularly like the curriculum there, and so after 2 semesters I quit. And at that point, Kennedy had been elected, and he immediately announced that he was going to start the Peace Corps. I had been trying to find some way to be adventurous and go to Latin America or someplace else like that for about a year before he announced the Peace Corps. But you had to be fluent in Spanish, you had to have a lot of money and all that kind of thing to join the Marinols or some like development program. So I jumped at the chance of applying for the Peace Corps, was accepted, went into a group of 45 collective people that basically were Midwesterners who trained for the Peace Corps at the University of Notre Dame. The program was basically sponsored by the president of Notre Dame, who was a very good friend of Peter Grace, who owned a huge shipping line all over Latin America. So when it came time for us to go to Chile, which was where we were going to serve, Peter Grace offered to take all of us on a Grace liner to Latin America. So we spent something like 3 weeks sailing down the coast of South America, having a very good time. Shuffleboard and fancy dinners and stopping at ports and visiting the markets to practice our Spanish, of course. We landed in not northern Chile, but central northern Chile after about 3 weeks, and spent some time learning about Chileans, and then went to our different sites where we worked in community development.
My name is Jim Fitzgerald. I was born in 1939 in Chicago. Went to Catholic schools and went to Loyola High School, and then I went to Notre Dame. And through some kinds of things, just as I was graduating from college, Peace Corps came up as a possibility, partly because the president, Father Hesper, was wanting Notre Dame people to be a part of it. So I did an interview, took a test, and got selected to join the Peace Corps. Went to Chile with the Peace Corps, and there were 5 groups that year, and we were in one of those 5 groups. And the group that went to Chile. We did training at Notre Dame. That's where I met Terry, because she was training for the same group. And after, I think we ended up with probably 10 weeks of training. Then we went to Chile for a little more orientation, and then I went to Cholchol, Chile, in southern Chile. We worked in agriculture, gardening, horticulture, things like that. And I talked Terry into coming down to my site because she was a skilled nurse, and these were all Mapuche Indians, and they desperately needed some health care, and there was a Dutch doctor there who could help supervise her. So anyway, however, I talked her into coming down to Cholchol, which was a good idea. Pretty soon we were married. When you are in love with a beautiful woman, you kind of work at it. You don't just pop in and say, here. So anyway, I picked her up at a place where she was working at a meeting and with a group of people. Picked her up in the Jeep, and she was nice enough to sit in the uncomfortable chair, kind of a box, was in the middle, and she had to sit there. And I thought, oh, this has got to be a good woman because she'd tolerate all that sort of thing. And we went out on the pier into the lake. It was dark, and I asked her to marry me, and she said yes, and changed her mind about 2 weeks later. So then we had to go through another whole thing. We went back to Cholchol in about 2 or 3 weeks to sort of sort this whole thing out. And when we did that, the cemetery was right outside of Cholchol, and I remember us sitting in the cemetery talking this whole thing over. We'd had a couple times where we met on the banks of the Cholchol River, talked all this sort of thing over. She wanted to make sure that I would square dance if they got married.
And farm.
And farm, yeah. Well, the farming was, yeah. We got married in Cholchol a few months later. We had some rural people coming, some native people coming to the wedding, some people from there, and a lot of the Peace Corps volunteers who were there at the time came to the wedding too.
The Catholic Church there was run by Maryknolls, who were missionaries themselves. The little church there was kind of expanding, building like a community hall right across from the church. It was only half finished, but we decided to have the reception in there. We thought we ought to fix it up a little bit. So my mom and dad and his mother had come down to Chile to go to the wedding, and my mom and I went to the market, and it happened to be the season of the copihues, which were wild red flowers all over the hills outside of this area. We went in and bought up every bouquet we could find of these gorgeous, they were beautiful flowers, and we decorated the building, and I carried copihues in the wedding, and everybody had copihues on. They were just gorgeous, and they were all wild. We went shopping in Temuco, the big town. I had a wedding dress made, but I didn't have a veil or anything, and I bought a gorgeous lace mantilla to wear as a veil and saved it, and I believe some young women in this family wore it as their wedding veils also. I still have it.
And after the wedding was over, we went to Temuco, took a bus that far, and in the meantime we fussed around with a little motorcycle. And I found a guy who was selling a big BMW 500 motorcycle, which was a big one. And as people in almost every town we went into would look at that motorcycle, and they'd say, "No tiene cardan." No tiene cardan, which was he didn't have a driveline, doesn't have a chain. All the motorcycles at that time that were all run that way, and this BMW had the other, so we were always of interest when we went into one town or another. And I was getting traveler's checks or something in Santiago. We took off and realized we'd lost all our documents and money and everything else on the street of Santiago. Terry went on to a town, I think it was Yayay. Got back in Santiago, and sure enough, somebody had found my stuff and turned it into the Peace Corps. From Yayay, the next morning, then we got on a train and put the motorcycle on a train to go up over the mountains and into Argentina. It was a very steep climb, and at that time, impossible to go with a motorcycle. So we got on the train. It was a kind of an overnight thing. First night we got out of Tarija, Bolivia. Got up the next day. I know we had a flat tire, and we didn't have any way to change it. And we were sort of out in the middle of a desert. And some Chilean truck driver came by, stopped, fixed our motorcycle. We didn't know anything about motorcycles or driving, and when I bought that nice motorcycle, we had a book of instructions which Terry studiously read while I just tinkered, and it was midnight in Santiago with a motorcycle we hadn't driven, and we couldn't figure out how to start it, except she's reading the instructions. And what we both remember very well was that she said, "It says tickle it, And we were, what does that mean? And so we're both underneath the motorcycle tickling it. I'm sure it was priming it, I would guess, but we didn't know that at that point. One stop we made that was interesting was we come right around Lake Titicaca and right into Puno. And there were some Maryknoll missionaries there who, for her teaching school and my fixing up old statues, gave us room and board. The Maryknoll priest, when we arrived, just took one look at Terry, and he said, "Go cover your face. Do something, you look terrible." And of course, she'd been sitting on the back of that motorcycle the whole time, with the wind blowing in her face for thousands of miles. And so this guy was concerned that we weren't taking care of her. I don't know. Every town we went to, everything happened was an adventure. The one that we remember a lot was going into Colombia. And Colombia at that point was in a pretty vicious civil war. But the one thing as we came into the border then was, do you have any guns? Incoming guns. And I was, no, we don't have any guns. And Terry was in charge of the guns. And we had a bag that had all of our pistols and whatever we had. We had an old pistol that we bought in Chol just to get through that country. And so Terry opened up her bag as we came into the custom things, and I said, no guns. And Terry opened up the zipper bag, and there was a pistol sitting right on top of our passport and everything else. Yeah. The next thing I see is Terry coming up to the border thing then, and walking through the customs like this. Because the pistol was slipping down her pants and it wasn't holding up and about to appear. So she was limping across. We got through there. At that point, Colombia was, we had that old sister we got in Chol. She had it around her neck. She said, we're not taking any chances. It probably would have killed both of us if we'd have tried to shoot it, but she had it strung around her neck with a thing and the pistol hanging down, sitting behind it. And we hitchhiked and got down a few hundred miles and got picked up by a potato truck. And it had a big tarp kind of thing covering the whole back. Not much ventilation at all. 100 or so miles, they stopped for something, and we were both sick from the fumes from the potatoes coming in. Got out of there eventually and into a town called Popoyan.
So where was the motorcycle?
In the truck.
Oh.
Put it in on top of the potatoes.
Yeah, sitting right up on top, yeah. Yeah, and so then we went into Popoyan and recovered, checked into an old pension house for about 3 days to get over what had happened to us on that
Carbon monoxide.
Huh?
Carbon monoxide
Carbon
poisoning.
monoxide poisoning is what it was. We got out of that. We ended up in Cali, Colombia. Couldn't get across the Panama Canal with the motorcycle. So we spent about 4 days in Buenaventura. Quite a lot of time in the American embassy trying to figure it out. They ended up finally saying, well, you can't go with your motorcycle, but we'll ship the motorcycle, and then you can fly over from Cali into Panama. So after a little bit of working on things, that's what we did, and we flew over the top to Panama.
That's the area that the migrants are all taking now. And they're not much better off than we were. How many years later they haven't still got a road? Nothing.
No.
But snakes and jungle stuff.
Wild and bandits and all that sort
Yeah.
of thing. But other than that, I don't know, then I think once we got into Central America, when we got to Mexico, at that point we thought we were in paradise. Almost all paved road all the way through. People really easy to be with. We didn't have much money, but managed to, we slept in the bus station for a couple of nights. We got to the border and our motorcycle wasn't running, not hardly at all. And we didn't know what was wrong and couldn't fix it. So we took it to a mechanic and we sold it to him for $300. So we got this old Nash Rambler because it had a bed seat you could lie in. The old Nash, the seats go back down. I remember clearly too that we had to put water in the radiator every 30 miles because that's how fast it leaked out and started heating up. So we put some more, kept going. So we came on and we got to Denver where our car was breaking down again. And we had our sleeping bags over us and we were sleeping on that thing in kind of a busy area. And all of a sudden I hear Terry go, oh! And then I hear a door close, bam! And it turns out, why don't you say what happened?
Somebody opened the door and saw the sleeping bag sitting there and turned me over. And I'm laying like this, staring him in the face. And that's when I kind of yelled, which scared him to death. He slammed the door and took off running like crazy. Everything was fine, but he was looking for something to steal. But he found a body in there instead. Scared him. Well, we got as far as Cheyenne, I think, and then had to abandon all hope and take a bus home.
Well, we had a car to trade in, so we used that money and got a bus. Took us as far as Chicago. I said, how much would a hot dog and a Coke be, I think? And I know that he said 42 cents. And I said, oh, I only have 41. Forget it, it's okay. And this guy who was sitting 2 seats away from us with one of these real old kind of Chicago suits of people that they're all battered up. And he reached over and to us, you know, and gave us, I think, a $5 bill or a $1 bill. And he said, take it, buddy, I've been broke myself, you know. And so we had enough money, we had the bus ticket, we got to Columbus, Ohio. Told Terry to make sure we didn't lose the dime. We had a dime to be able to call her parents with. And so she called, and her dad came, picked us up, and that was the end of the trip.
This is a skillet that I bought in Temuco to cook in our nice little house we had after we were married. And we cooked on it for a couple months, and then I decided I had to take it with me on the motorcycle because we had to have something to fry things with. So this skillet came along on the motorcycle, and it's had a few years of getting bent and everything else, but I still can use it. It's kind of a thin skillet, so it burns things pretty easy, but it's still useful. So we got back out from Chicago to Denver looking for work for Jim. We got into a motel and just started calling every school system we could find in the western part of the United States. So we moved out to Wyoming, Riverton, where there was a position open in a small reservation school and had a high school. And when we found a house to rent, and it was just adorable. It was a garage. They had a uranium mining boom there, and every building in the town had been turned into a residential area, so we had this cute little one-room garage house and a little picket fence around it, and we got jobs and got a dog that had been found in the city pound, they called it. Lived there for several months until we found a 160-acre place out of town, about 25 miles out of town. A real Wyoming prairie kind of place. Wind, nice little house, a water well out in the outer ways, and that was it. We had a barrel kind of stove to keep warm. And we lived there for about a year and a half. I got a job at the local hospital, and he was teaching in the high school on the Arapaho-Shoshone Reservation. Jim decided to go back for his master's because he only had a bachelor's and he can't be a teacher very long with that. And I was pregnant, and we went to Laramie for his summer studies. So I went into labor, but there were 2 babies that we didn't know. When they were born, I didn't know there were 2 babies. Nobody else did either. So the nurse took the baby outside and showed him to Jim, and he got on the telephone right away and called my mother and said, we just had a baby. And the nurse is tapping him on the shoulder and saying, there's another one. There's another one. So that was kind of a surprise. But they were both big babies, so there wasn't anything special about it, except I'd done all that stuff you're supposed to do, you know, pack the suitcase and all that sort of thing. We had to go out and buy a second bunch of diapers. plastic pants and things like that real quick. So we took them home, and we had one car bed as a place to sleep. The house we were renting then was tiny, tiny. And we managed to put that one car bed on a dresser, and then found a clothes basket. Nice big clothes basket. We could make a bed for the other kid. And then when they were 10 days old, I took them back to Chicago to his mother's, and then went down to Ohio, presenting to their other grandparents. I had a great time on the train. People wanted to know what I had in the boxes, and I took them in. One woman tried to snatch one of them out and said, "You can't have them in a cardboard box." But they got along fine in the cardboard box. You just got to have it big enough, for 2 kids. It was too dry. It was too cold. You couldn't grow tomatoes for love nor money. And we decided we would look for something else. Restarted our conversation with the federal government again, and got a position with the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps by that time had expanded a little bit and had taken in a lot more people, and they owned a Boy Scout camp in Puerto Rico where they were sending what they called trainees. These were people that had signed up and been accepted. They would put them into groups wherever they were that were going in certain countries, like there was a Colombia group and an Ecuador group and that kind of thing. And they would send them there for a matter of 2 months. And the camps were run by ex-volunteers so that we could teach the real thing, So we got a job there. We lived there for almost a year in the jungles, the higher elevations of Puerto Rico.
We were both working, doing training. I was teaching Spanish, and Terry was, at that point, taking care of children, besides other things. Up there in the mountains outside of Utuado was the name of the city. And we went through one long cycle of Peace Corps training, which was quite a thing. We did something pretty unusual at that point, which was to we had about 100 volunteers at a time in 2 camps. And when they came, we had been reading Paulo Freire and some radical intellectuals on that time. And what we did was we didn't schedule any classes. And all the Peace Corps training had been intensive, 4 hours of Spanish and 2 hours of this, and we had to do drown proofing in the ocean and rock climbing. Tracy was a great rock climber. Anyway, what we did with the training program, which was unusual, was we canceled all the classes. And we said, this is an unstructured program, and you guys make it. And it was very controversial within the Peace Corps. They even sent down to investigate what was happening because they'd heard it had been some psychological something or other. But the trainees who were in camp at that time were so neat. We put the jefes, the big guys, in the same dorm as the trainees. And the trainees were like zealots for our program at that point. They loved it. It started out kind of rocky, but eventually it was just this big wild camp with bulletin boards all over the place saying Spanish class tonight at 10 o'clock, and here's this, and here's this, and here's this. And I think people, and it went on for, after we left, for 2-3 sessions. But they liked us and they were going through, so they gave us a job in Ecuador, which at that point was like about the most desirable place Peace Corps had. Lots of indigenous people, very rural, a lot of Quechua spoken. We took that job and moved to Cuenca, which is in central Ecuador, more or less in the mountains. Tracy went down to the market with the kids, buying stuff.
And selling rabbits. I grew the rabbits in the front yard.
Selling rabbits, yeah. And I was loving it. I was traveling and getting to know every little town in Ecuador at that point. And we're in Cuenca for 2 years, and I was a regional director. We had 50 volunteers, so I was going all around visiting them. We had sheep programs and agricultural problems of different kinds, and we supervised them until for a few years, a little more.
We got home and went to D.C. to work, and then we decided to go west again. We were not too sure what we would do. Jim was flying back and forth between D.C. and Los Angeles anyway, so he stopped in Colorado and basically went in and got me lined up to go to graduate school at the Colorado University in Denver. And then he went on working back and forth between D.C. and California for a little while, and I got my degree there. And then we took off, started touring this whole area for a place to live and a ranch to buy. We went all over the place and trying to find jobs that he could qualify for. We ended up in this area, and a professor at Fort Lewis had had a heart attack during the summer, and this was almost the beginning of the school year, and they were desperate for a Spanish teacher. And he went in, we ran into Penny's, bought him a coat and tie, and he went in and did an interview and got the job. So we had about a week to find our dream home, and we found this place, and we decided it was the right place. At that time it was 640 acres. The house was sitting here, not here, but over a little bit ways. It had not been lived in since 1918. This was 1970 by this time, and had been abandoned in 1928. And the rancher who bought it, who lived down the road a little ways, had let cows graze it. That's what was all it was used for, was summer pasture. Well, the cows, of course, had moved in, and the place was their stable. So when we bought it, it had no doors, no windows, and the manure was about 2.5 feet deep in the house. So when we bought it, we pulled in a trailer and parked it down closer to the county road. And then that summer, Mom and Dad came out and spent the entire summer digging the manure out of the house. And they would dig out great big pieces, which would kind of turn into round pieces, and they'd roll them out and take them out the side. We worked on the house a little bit, put windows and doors and things like that in it, and it was really cheap land then. Nobody had found Durango yet, believe me. And my dad kept saying, "You don't want to live there, the soil is sour." I don't know what he meant, but it doesn't grow very well. So.
Well, she described pretty much like it was, no doors, no windows, and all that sort of thing. We had some very, very cold winters. We moved in January. The people were pretty nice to us. There were a teacher at Fort Lewis and another person who would put us up, knowing we had 2 children that were very young. So we stayed there for a couple of days sometimes. It was pretty difficult. I mean, like I was teaching, pretty much had to go in every day to Fort Lewis to do classes and come back, and Terry was nursing.
The road was pure dirt, had big ruts in it, and we often couldn't drive it. We didn't have any water, so we bought an old Jeep, and we got a couple of metal barrels in the Jeep, and we'd go into town and fill them up with water and then try to get up the road. Sometimes losing an awful lot of water. But the girls had to go to school, so we bought a couple of older riding horses. We would sometimes take them, and then they went down themselves. They went down the road to the school bus stop, put the horses in an old barn that had been abandoned down there, and locked them in, and then got on the horses again and came home, except they were too short to get in the saddle because these were regular size horses. So they learned pretty quickly how to climb up on any piece of fence that might be around, rail fence of some kind, and get on the horse. And I would know when the school bus was supposed to be there, and I'd time it. And if they didn't show up in the time allotted, I'd go down and find them. And at one time, Gretchen especially, the horse that she was riding stepped in a big snowbank and kind of fell over, and Gretchen fell off. She couldn't get back on for a while because she couldn't find a place to climb out of the snow and come up. But she got back on before I got back down there to find her. So, and then another time, the horse that Janine was on ran away. That was real terrifying because it was after dark. And
one of the things that we did then was to get a sleigh. And we had a single horse, could pull that, take us all in, and we'd take the horse, dump it, come back here.
Horse didn't know how to pull, but if we got her on the road, she would go down. But she didn't know anything about being directed or anything. She just ran straight down. Then we'd fix her back up, and up she'd come again this way.
Unfortunately, there was so much snow on either side of the road that she couldn't really run away too easily. Yeah. She did one time, but
the house, we moved it because it was over there, over north of us here, and there's a ridge there, and you couldn't see the mountains. But from here, you could see these gorgeous mountains, all snow-covered most of the summer. So we hired a house mover to pick up this house and move it over here. We sat it on stumps rather than cement blocks, which nobody had ever heard of, but the stumps are sitting on cement, and by and large, it's not given in too far to too much closer to the ground even now. It creaks quite a bit, but that's about all you can say. And we've lived here ever since. It's about 60 years now, I think, isn't it? And the kitty cats do well here, don't they? Mm-hmm.